Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. Your support helps us bring you more stories like this. Now, let's begin. It was Saturday, the 15th of August, 1885, in the town of Emporia, Kansas. The air hung heavy and still, as it did in the late summer months across the plains. On Commercial Street, where the houses stood large and well appointed behind iron gates, a gentleman named Mr. James Reeves Walcop returned home from business in Topeka. He was 48 years old, twice widowed, and had married for the third time just 3 weeks prior. His new wife was Miss Minnie Wallace, formerly of New Orleans. She was 16 years old. The house was furnished with walnut tables and Brussels carpets. There were servants to manage the household, stables at the rear, and gas lights that burned in every room. Mr. Walcop was a man of considerable wealth. He owned shares in coal mining ventures, railroad contracts, and grocery establishments across 3 counties. He had served as president of the town council. His reputation was that of a gentleman who conducted business with precision and lived with a certain degree of indulgence. That evening, he took ill. By morning, a doctor had been summoned. Within the week, Mr. James Reeves Walcop would be dead, and his young bride would stand accused of murder by poison. Mr. James Reeves Walcop had first travelled to New Orleans in December of 1884. The World's Industrial and Cotton Centennial Exposition had opened that month, and gentlemen of means came from across the country to see the grand pavilions and electric lights. He took rooms at a boarding house on Canal Street, in the district known as Storyville. The house was managed by a widow named Mrs. Elizabeth Wallace, who had 2 daughters. Both were said to be accomplished at the piano. Both were said to be very beautiful. Mr. Walcop was introduced to the elder daughter, Miss Minnie Wallace. She was 15 years old, with dark hair and a manner that seemed to charm every gentleman who visited the house. He told Mrs. Wallace that he wished to marry her daughter. It was not an uncommon request. Men came regularly to ask for the hands of the Wallace sisters. Mrs. Wallace listened politely and made no immediate reply. 4 months later, Mr. Walcop returned to New Orleans. This time, he brought his own daughter, Miss Elizabeth Walcop, who wished to see the exposition. They again took rooms at Mrs. Wallace's establishment on Canal Street. Mr. Walcop repeated his offer of marriage. He assured Mrs. Wallace that her daughter would want for nothing, that she would live in a fine house, that she would be provided for in every particular. Mrs. Wallace told him the decision must be Minnie's to make, but that, before any agreement could be reached, she and her daughter would need to visit him in Emporia. They made the journey in July of 1885. Mrs. Wallace was shown through the house on Commercial Street. She saw the parlour with its carved mantelpiece, the dining room with seating for 12, the silver tea service, the grandfather clock in the hall. She saw that Mr. Walcop was indeed a man of substance. Minnie agreed to the marriage. The ceremony took place on the 22nd of July, 1885, in Covington, Kentucky. Mrs. Wallace returned to New Orleans. Mr. and Mrs. Walcop travelled to Emporia, where they were received at a public reception held by the town council. Minnie was now mistress of a household. She had servants, accounts at the dressmaker's, and a husband who was absent for days at a time on business. 3 weeks later, he returned home, feeling unwell. On the evening of Saturday, the 15th of August, Mrs. Minnie Walcop sent word to Dr. Luther Jacobs. The doctor arrived to find Mr. Walcop in bed, suffering from severe cramping in the stomach and repeated bouts of sickness. Dr. Jacobs prepared a tonic and left instructions for rest. By Sunday morning, the patient had improved somewhat. By Tuesday, the 18th of August, he had taken ill again. Dr. Jacobs returned. Mr. Walcop complained of the same symptoms: pain in the abdomen, nausea, weakness in the limbs. The doctor prescribed another remedy and departed. On Thursday, the 20th of August, Mr. Walcop felt well enough to take food. He ate canned oysters for his supper. Within hours, he was ill once more. Dr. Jacobs came back to the house on Commercial Street. By now, he had begun to form a suspicion. The pattern of illness, the alternating periods of recovery and relapse, the specific nature of the symptoms, all of these pointed to a particular cause. He began to believe that his patient was being poisoned with arsenic. This view was shared by Mr. Walcop's daughters from his previous marriages. They had come to Emporia upon hearing of their father's sudden illness. They found it strange that a man of robust health should decline so rapidly. They found it strange that his 16-year-old bride, whom he had known for less than a year, should be so attentive at his bedside. They made their suspicions known to Dr. Jacobs and to others in the household. On Saturday, the 22nd of August, exactly 1 month after the wedding, Mr. Walcop's condition worsened considerably. His daughters would not permit Mrs. Walcop to enter the sick room. They stood outside the door and turned her away. Dr. Jacobs remained at the bedside. By late afternoon, it was clear that nothing more could be done. Mr. James Reeves Walcop died at 7 o'clock in the evening. The news spread quickly through Emporia. By nightfall, it was the subject of conversation in every parlour and public house. A prominent gentleman, dead within a month of marrying a girl from New Orleans, a girl more than half his age, a girl who had purchased arsenic from local pharmacies in the days before his death. The police were summoned to the house on Commercial Street. The officers arrived after dark. They were admitted by the housekeeper and shown into the parlour, where Mrs. Walcop sat in mourning dress. She was calm, composed, and answered their questions with a steady voice. Yes, her husband had been ill for several days. Yes, she had cared for him. Yes, she had sent for the doctor repeatedly. No, she could not explain the cause of his sudden decline. The police made inquiries at the pharmacies on Commercial Street and 6th Avenue. At one establishment, the chemist produced his register. It showed that Mrs. Walcop had purchased strychnine on the 14th of August, the day before her husband first fell ill. She had returned on the 16th to purchase arsenic. She had returned again on the 18th to purchase more arsenic. At another pharmacy, the proprietor stated that she had requested arsenic, but that he had refused to sell it to her, as she would not provide a reason for its use. When questioned about these purchases, Mrs. Walcop gave her explanation without hesitation. The strychnine, she said, was used for removing stains from clothing. The arsenic was for application to her face, as it was known to improve the complexion. She had not used all of the arsenic she had purchased, and was willing to surrender what remained. She went to the sideboard and retrieved a small cardboard box. As she handed it to the officer, it slipped from her grasp. The box struck the floor. White powder scattered across the boards and into the cracks between them. The officers attempted to collect what they could, scraping it into an envelope, but much of it was lost. It would now be impossible to determine whether any had been used. Mrs. Walcop was informed that she must remain at the house while the investigation continued. 2 officers were posted at the doors. Friends arrived to sit with her. A post-mortem examination was ordered. The autopsy was conducted the following day by the county physician. The body was opened and examined. Samples of the stomach contents, liver, and kidneys were removed and sealed in glass jars for further analysis. The physician's preliminary conclusion was that death had resulted from arsenic poisoning. The organs were sent to the state laboratory for confirmation. The funeral took place 3 days later. Mrs. Walcop did not attend. The laboratory examination was completed within the week. The chemist, Dr. Charles Prentice, submitted a detailed report. He stated that he had tested the tissue samples using the Marsh test and the Reinsch test, both of which were standard procedures for detecting the presence of metallic poisons. Both tests returned positive results for arsenic. The quantity found in the stomach and liver was, in his professional opinion, sufficient to have caused death. Dr. Prentice noted that the pattern of arsenic distribution in the organs suggested repeated administration over several days, rather than a single large dose. This was consistent with the deceased's alternating periods of illness and partial recovery. The chemist concluded that Mr. James Reeves Walcop had died as a result of arsenic poisoning, and that the arsenic had been ingested deliberately and with fatal intent. An inquest was convened at the county courthouse. Dr. Jacobs gave testimony regarding the deceased's symptoms and the course of his illness. He stated that the cramping, vomiting, and weakness were all consistent with arsenic poisoning. He stated further that he had grown suspicious during his final visits to the house and that he had communicated these suspicions to the family. The pharmacists were called to give evidence. Each confirmed that Mrs. Walcop had purchased both strychnine and arsenic in the days preceding her husband's death. One stated that she had become agitated when he refused to sell her arsenic without a stated purpose. Another stated that she had purchased the poison on 3 separate occasions. Dr. Charles Scott, a physician who had treated Mr. Walcop in previous years, testified that the deceased had once told him that he took medication containing small amounts of arsenic and opium. Dr. Scott stated that Mr. Walcop had claimed arsenic served as a tonic and a remedy for certain private ailments. However, Dr. Scott also testified that the post-mortem examination had revealed no evidence of chronic arsenic use or of any of the diseases that Mr. Walcop had claimed to suffer from. The inquest concluded on the 3rd of September, 1885. The verdict was that Mr. James Reeves Walcop had died of arsenic poisoning, and that the poison had been administered by his wife, Mrs. Minnie Wallace Walcop. If you're finding this case as compelling as we are, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It truly helps us continue researching and sharing these forgotten stories from history. We also read every comment, so let us know your thoughts on this case below. Now, let's continue. A warrant was issued for the arrest of Mrs. Walcop on the charge of willful murder. She was taken into custody and remanded to the county jail. Her mother, Mrs. Elizabeth Wallace, travelled from New Orleans upon hearing the news. She was accompanied by a Louisiana judge named William T. Houston, who had long been acquainted with the family. Mrs. Wallace petitioned the court to appoint a legal guardian for her daughter, who was still a minor. The court agreed. Mr. William J. Martindale, a former mayor of Emporia, was named as guardian. The trial was set for October. The trial of Mrs. Minnie Wallace Walcop commenced on Monday, the 19th of October, 1885, at the Lyon County District Court in Emporia. Judge Samuel Kinney presided. The courtroom was filled beyond capacity, with more than 300 persons in attendance, and hundreds more gathered in the street outside. Journalists from newspapers in Kansas, Missouri, Louisiana, and New York sat in the gallery. The case had attracted attention across the country. The prosecution was led by the county attorney, who presented the evidence methodically. He called the pharmacists, who confirmed the purchases of strychnine and arsenic. He called Dr. Jacobs, who described the symptoms of poisoning. He called Dr. Prentice, who explained the results of the chemical analysis. He called the neighbours, who testified that they had seen Mrs. Walcop leaving the house on the days in question. He called the housekeeper, who stated that Mrs. Walcop had been alone with her husband during his final hours. The defence strategy was straightforward. Mr. Walcop, they argued, had been in the habit of taking arsenic as a tonic and for the treatment of private ailments. He had died, they suggested, not from deliberate poisoning, but from an accidental overdose of a substance he had long used. They called witnesses who claimed that Mr. Walcop had told them he took arsenic regularly. They called a physician from another county, who stated that arsenic was sometimes prescribed for various complaints. However, the autopsy had shown no signs of chronic arsenic use. There were no records of Mr. Walcop purchasing arsenic from any pharmacy in Emporia. The witnesses who claimed he had been addicted to the substance were all from other towns, encountered during his travels. None could produce evidence that he had taken arsenic while at home. On the fourth day of the trial, Mrs. Walcop took the stand in her own defence. She spoke quietly and with great composure. She stated that her husband had asked her to purchase arsenic for him, and that she had done so at his request. She stated that he had instructed the maid to bring it to him, and that, in his weakened condition, he had taken too much. The jury retired to consider the verdict on Thursday, the 22nd of October. They deliberated for 52 hours. On Saturday afternoon, they returned to the courtroom. The foreman stood and delivered the verdict. Not guilty. The announcement was met with applause from the gallery. Judge Kinney called for order and dismissed the jury. Mrs. Walcop was released from custody immediately. She left the courthouse, accompanied by her mother and Mr. Martindale. A crowd had gathered outside, and many pressed forward to offer their congratulations. Others stood silent, watching her pass. The newspapers reported the verdict with varying degrees of approval. Some praised the jury for their mercy, noting that there had been reasonable doubt as to whether the poisoning had been deliberate or accidental. Others expressed outrage, suggesting that a beautiful young woman had been acquitted of a crime that would have sent a man to the gallows. The debate continued for weeks in editorials and letters to the editors. One juror later gave an interview to a Kansas newspaper. He stated that the jury had been deeply divided, but that in the end, they could not bring themselves to convict a 16-year-old girl on evidence that, while compelling, was not entirely conclusive. He was reported to have said, "If I had voted for that little girl's conviction, her face would haunt me to my dying day." Under the terms of Mr. Walcop's will, his widow inherited the sum of $250,000, along with the house on Commercial Street and its contents. On the 19th of November, 1885, Mrs. Minnie Wallace Walcop returned to New Orleans with her mother. She did not return to Emporia. In the years that followed, Mrs. Walcop's name appeared occasionally in society columns and legal notices. She was seen in the company of prominent gentlemen in New Orleans and later in Chicago. In 1897, she married again. Her second husband, Mr. John Burden Ketchum, died 12 days after the wedding. An autopsy found no evidence of poisoning. Mrs. Walcop inherited his estate. The family challenged the will, but the courts upheld her claim. Records from the early 1900s show that she became acquainted with a wealthy Chicago financier named Mr. Delancey Horton Louderback. He was married, but was said to be devoted to Mrs. Walcop. He built her a house and furnished it lavishly. When his wife died, he sent word to Mrs. Walcop, who was then living in London, asking her to return and marry him. She declined. Shortly afterward, Mr. Louderback died of cyanide poisoning. His will left 25% of his estate to Mrs. Walcop. No charges were brought. Mrs. Minnie Wallace Walcop lived out her remaining years in California under the name Estelle Minnie Keating. She died in San Diego on the 10th of May, 1957, at the age of 88. The newspapers made no mention of the trial in Emporia. The case had long since faded from memory. The file remained in the county records, sealed and gathering dust in the basement of the courthouse, where it rests still.